What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the 1776 podcast. This week, my co-host Forrest James and I will be interviewing David Baker. David is the founder and executive director of the Watershed Association, or Wimberley Valley Watershed Association. Jacob's Well, if you're familiar with that, in large part is here today in the park that it is because of David. David is one of the original owners back in the 80s of Jacob's Well, which led to him founding the Watershed Association, and then really spearheading creating what Jacob's Well is today, and protecting a lot of the property in the area. The Watershed Association is buying up land all in that area to protect the watershed. There's also some of the land that will be opening in the coming months or years as new preserves, new parks for us to visit, which is very, very exciting. So you'll learn about that today. And we also dive into a variety of conservation topics, talking about the aquifers, what conservation easements mean. I mean, there's a variety of topics. We go on for a while. But if you're interested in, the outdoors, conservation, Jacob's Well, what's happening down there, a lot of the water issues we face, if any of that, is something you'd like to learn about, this is the episode for you. Very thankful for David for everything he's done for conservation, and opening up new parks for us, which is really, really exciting. So hope y'all enjoy.
We're in the process of developing the flow center. I was telling you about that. Mm-hmm. It's the old Baptist church there in Wimberley, and the watershed bought. It's 6.5 acres right at the entry of Blue Hole Park. Mm-hmm. So it's 33,000 square feet of buildings, and we've got environmental school there. We've got a vision to kind of create a performing arts center and art center, and
cool.
And this, I could imagine this being an aspect of that whole
Definitely
kind of art for water, program. But this is cool.
Yeah.
This is like, you guys are kind of pro here all of a sudden.
We appreciate that.
Well, yeah. I did this for a living before.
Oh.
So the last 2 years, I don't know how much you know, but I went to work for a guy named Matt Reisinger. And he's a home builder here in town, but he's also the host of the Build Show. And
oh yeah, you were telling me about that.
And so I went to work for him to build houses. I wound up his producer. It's a crazy long story, but I ended up producing a lot of video podcasts for him. And so I kind of just fell into the production world and learned about it. And then when I teamed up with Forrest, I was like, maybe we should do that here. And so we're doing it for the podcast we started, just like you. We feel like we know a lot of random, interesting people we want to talk to. And then also we're going to start creating a lot of content for our businesses because, there's also a roofing and a pool company.
Right.
And so we're going to do all sorts of educational content,
That's
use
nice.
this as a backdrop, put a whiteboard on here and break down things.
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
so before we even show up to a client's house, we're going to send them, here's what to expect, and kind of sell the job before we even show up, really.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. I think if you can paint the picture of, the where you want to go and how you're going to get there, that makes it people less stressed out, because
we know it. Customers love when they get pre-educated on what we're about to go over, and when it's in person, sometimes they get overwhelmed. So we're trying to get a lot of the information about who we are and how we operate and why we're different to them before we show up.
That's awesome.
Try to save everyone some time and just be crystal clear on what we're offering.
You guys, that's so smart. Yeah, good deal.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you for coming on today. Appreciate you coming to stop by.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is it's a real treat we had such great connection when we met, and just all the great things you're doing with with your Instagram site, and then the West Cave. He had the daunting task of having to lead the paddles up. That's such a tough thing, but what a great cause that is.
Yeah, it was fun, and so we got up there. I think I showed you the video for us for West Cave at our event. I got up there and tried to raise a little money, and so that was the first time, probably the biggest group of people I've spoken in front of before, and it wasn't anything crazy, but it was fun. I had a good time with it.
You did great. Yeah,
well,
you wouldn't have. Nobody knew that. You seem like a pro.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'd love to just maybe kick us off with maybe just a high level, who you are, what you're up to these days. And then I want to pick your brain on some Jacob's Well topics.
Yeah, gladly. Well, I'm David Baker. I actually grew up in the Midwest in Kansas City. Was really I was lucky. My father was big fisherman, hunter, outdoorsman. Took us on float trips almost every weekend in the summer. We'd go on those beautiful rivers in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas and Lake of the Ozarks. And so, we had a lot of outdoor experience as a young person, and, played sports, of course, football, and went to the University of Missouri on a football scholarship.
Nice.
What position did you play?
I was tailback.
Okay.
And was recruited by, almost 50 colleges. I was kind of a big deal, but
I won't challenge you to a foot race then.
No, not now. I couldn't run 40 yards in like 10 minutes, I think. But back then, that was a big part of my life. And then, I studied journalism and then got injured and ended up going to the Kansas City Art Institute. And that's where I kind of shifted to focus on.
You said Art Institute?
Art Institute,
okay,
yeah. So I focused on art and making art, and that I kind of made a career of that. And
at that time, what type of art was it? Like oil painting, or what were you doing?
I was doing mainly I would do acrylic painting, but I really got into woodwork and made furniture and then
that's my kind of art.
Yeah, and I did some design work. I really love architecture, and so I moved. I was able to move down to Texas in 1988, and I was actually doing set design for a production company in Austin. And the first trip I came down here, I was like, I don't know, it's if this is a good gig. But they took me to Austin. Of course, that was amazing to see Austin. And then they took me out to Kerrville to the folk festival, and went to the Medina River.
Oh, wow.
And when I saw that river and the cypress trees and just the clear water, I was like, wow, this is a special place. And at that time, I was living in Santa Cruz, California, up on a mountaintop in the redwood forest. And I thought I'd never leave there. I thought that
hard spot to leave.
That was I was like, wow, this is amazing. My son Jacob was born there.
How old were you at this point?
I was about 29.
Okay.
Yeah, 28, and then got invited down to Texas, and I was so moved. I'm like, we need to move down here, and they offered me this longer job. At that time, we'd also been looking at Taos, New Mexico. We love that.
One of my favorite places.
Oh,
Northern New Mexico to me is I love it up there.
It's just there's something magical about that landscape, and as an artist, that was a really good place. But then some friends said, "Oh, why don't you go out to Wimberley?" Because we were looking for a house South Austin area, and I drove down 12, and I saw those hills, and I was like, "This is it. This is the spot."
Yeah.
And so I actually rented a storage locker. I was like, "Man, this is a place," and I'd hired a real estate person to kind of look for just a rental or something. We weren't really ready to buy, and I'm sitting there looking at the truck going, oh, man, how am I going to unload all this stuff? I got to go hire somebody to help me. She pulls up and she's like, David, I think you found your place, a little stone house at Jacob's Well. And I'm like, what's Jacob's Well? And I was thinking like, a well, And she's like, you better get out there because locals find out it'll be gone. And went out there and saw the house. There were two houses. Walked down that hill and down the steps to the well, and before I even got to the well, the hair on my arm stood up, and I was like, "Oh, this!" And I walked around that corner. I'm like, "Oh my God,
this is the spot.
This is the place."
So it's for sale. So you were able to buy that property?
Well, at that time, it was just for lease.
Okay.
The one little house was for lease, and so we moved in there, and still thinking we might go to Taos, and my son. He was 9 months old. His name was Jacob. So we're like, Jacob's Well.
This is right. It's too perfect.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. And for the artist to be at the well, it was just, I was so inspired. I think one of the best paintings I ever painted was that first week that I moved there. I was just so moved by, how magnificent the well was and just what a sacred place it was. And so about, I don't know, it was maybe 6 months, 8 months later, I think we had a year lease. I met the rancher that owned it. And I said, thanks for renting it. This place. It's so nice. My son's name's Jacob. And he's like, well, if you like it that much, why don't you make me an offer? And I'm like, you'd sell the well? And he's like, yeah, it's just, lots of trespassers and kids drinking beer there. And, just had a whole story about how challenging it was to manage it.
At that time, did he own all sides, or what?
He had two of the pies of the four pies, because it was divided into four different pieces. So there was the RV park, there was the old swim and tennis center, and so he used to lease access to the big Wood Creek North development through that one parcel. And so he'd cut that off and built a fence, but everybody'd cut the fence and come in. And back then it was pretty quiet. The locals would come and, swim and jump in, but then, they just come down to cool off. It wasn't like, people were hanging out there all day. So it was my policy was like, look, just leave it cleaner than you found it. Be respectful that other people want to come. And the locals pretty much did that, But we ended up, being able to buy about 25 acres and half of the well, and we opened a little bed and breakfast. And so that was the beginning of Dancing Waters Inn. I think it was the third B&B in Wimberley.
What year was that?
It was probably like 1989, 90.
Okay.
And so that's how it started. And then about the mid-90s, I'd gotten involved in the community. We were trying to incorporate Wimberley and gotten on a committee that was looking at water. And we sort of decided, we need an organization to work on trying to do land conservation, be a land trust, do science and research. No one was monitoring flow or water quality, and somebody to educate the community and work on policies. And so we formed the Wimberley Valley Watershed Association in 1996. And, of course, immediately got into a fight with the Aqua. Back then it was Aqua Source, bought the utility and wanted to discharge right in the creek. And so, a lot of this work has been about reacting to the threats, the things that are coming at us. And in the last decade or so, we've really tried to pivot more to, what we're for as opposed to what we're against. And we still have those fights. We still have things that we don't, want to see happen. And we've actually formed separate organizations to work on those issues. But, it's the fastest growing county in the United States. Everybody wants to come to the hill country, but we have a finite amount of water, finite amount of open space and land. And so land conservation has really been at the center of our mission, protecting land to protect water, protect habitat, and to provide, open space and parkland for public access on some of those lands.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And so from 96, when you formed that organization with the group of folks to look after that, how has that evolved over the years? I mean, as of today, I guess at that time, the organization on the property you had was still half of the well. As of today, how is it set up today? Do you own the whole property, or how does that look, from 96 on?
Yeah. We ended up in 2005, the watershed bought out our interest. My partner and I bought out the old RV park and the swim center. And so that put together about 46 acres, which was the first time, we think, since the 1860s that had all been in one holding.
Wow.
And about in that same year, there was a developer that was proposing to put in 65 condos and a hotel right above that. We were able to buy him out. And so that expanded it to about 98 acres. And And at that time, the county, we in 2003 passed a small bond, $3.5 million for parks and open space. 2007, we passed a bond for $30 million. And so what we ended up doing was, working with the county to pay down that debt, and then we ultimately deeded over about 88 acres and 100% of the well to Hays County.
Wow.
So that became the Jacobsville Natural Area. And since that time, we now have almost 500 acres protected around Jacob's Well, the old Coleman's Ranch, which has got the Wimberley Bat Cave, and there's a tract that has 118 karst features on it. It's just warbler habitat. It's an incredible piece of land. We're actually calling that Karst Canyon Preserve now.
So is that going to be open to the public at some time?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How cool.
We're in the final phase of transferring that to Hays County, and Nature Conservancy holds a conservation easement on it, so it's protected in terms of, the county can't, overdevelop that, and has to keep it in really a natural state and as a preserve and natural area.
I love hearing when there's new parks, and I guess for me in conservation, my spots that really jump out to me is water, because I think that's a huge issue we face, and then also anything that gets private land public to me is huge, with so much of Texas being private and so many folks wanting to get outdoors. Anything like that to me just makes me excited and happy to hear about new parks. And so with there being over 100 or 150, what you said, karst features, I know those areas are very sensitive. So what is access like going to be? It might be too soon to say, so tell me that too. But what type of access will folks have to that property, or free reign, air quotes, that they could do?
Yeah, there'd be a trail system that, we encourage people to stay on those trails, and there'll be a lot of interpretive, signage, but it'll essentially be a natural area, not, basically a trail, not a lot of infrastructure there. There is a plan in the parks plan to ultimately put a kind of nature research center as part of the natural area, which would be down closer to the well. We have over 100,000 visitors that come there each year, about 30,000 that come to swim, 60,000 at Blue Hole. So it's become a huge attractor for our kind of ecotourism. We estimate somewhere between 75 to 100 million in revenue from overnight lodging and the impacts of those visitors over 30 different countries. So it's become an attractor, not just to Texas and the U.S., but people from all over the world that want to come and see that spring.
Absolutely. Jacob's Well is just absolutely amazing. I really encourage folks, to go and see if they haven't. Unfortunately now, I don't know with the rain, I know the springs have gone dry. I don't know if they're back trickling at all. I think I maybe saw a post there was a little bit of water. But before we jump into that, because I'd love to kind of get to today's viewpoint of the springs, but would you just break down what is Jacob's Well? For folks that have no idea even what we're talking about, can you give us the Jacob's Well pitch?
Yeah. Jacob's Well it's an artesian spring, which means that the water is under pressure and is forced up from about 140 feet deep in the aquifer. And the cavern, it's the second longest underwater cave in Texas. I think Phantom Cave out in West Texas is a little longer, but this is over 7,500 feet have been mapped by cave divers. Wow. The main channel goes back about 5,500 feet, so over a mile back in the aquifer. It provides the base flow for Cypress Creek. That's the little creek that runs through Wimberley and then goes to Blue Hole Regional Park there, and then it goes into the confluence of the Blanco River. So when it's flowing, at normal conditions, it'll provide anywhere from 8 to 10% of the base flow to the Blanco River. And one kind of neat thing we discovered is that that water flows downstream down the Blanco, and it drops in the Edwards Aquifer, because about 80% of the recharge happens in these stream bottoms.
Interesting.
It goes back into the aquifer through cracks and fissures in the creeks and rivers, and so it goes in there just outside of Kyle, and and then that water normally comes out of San Marcos Springs. Some of it goes on down, through the main course to the San Marcos River. But during times of drought, that water goes all the way to Barton Springs. So you could swim in Jacob's Well in the morning, and maybe the next day you'd be swimming in the same water in Barton Springs.
Oh, interesting.
So that's how it's all interconnected, right? And then that water makes its way all the way down to the estuaries, and keeps the bays healthy and those ecosystems there. So these systems are so important, to understand how all that's interconnected.
It's so easy to think that, Jacob's Well is isolated. You look at it dry there, and you don't think about it impacting Barton Springs of all places. I would have never made that connection.
Well, yeah, in the Hill Country in general, we've got the Trinity Aquifer there and the Edwards, which are different systems, but 100% of the drinking water for the city of San Antonio is coming out of these Hill Country watersheds. So protecting this upstream, these headwaters, for not only for Barton Springs, San Marcos, Comal, and the drinking water of San Antonio is really, really important. And the cities have done a good job. I think both San Antonio and Austin of starting to protect the recharge zone, but I think more investment out in the contributing zone where the first raindrops fall is really important.
Is your group actively trying to expand to get as much of that land as possible when and if it comes available?
Yeah, land conservation is central to our mission. There's a lot of great land trusts that are working in the Hill Country, Texas Land Conservancy, Hill Country Conservancy, TNC. Recently, the Hill Country Land Trust, which I was part of the founding board, just merged with Texas Land Conservancy. And so all those groups are working, to try to, primarily work on private land conservation. But I think now, we are, as you said, with the most recent bond issue in Hays County is $75 million in 2020. One of the great acquisitions we've done there or the county's done, is the old Boy Scout camp. It's now called Sentinel Peak Preserve, and so the county has 500 acres on both sides of the Blanco River, a beautiful long stretch there that'll be open to the public hopefully in the next year or so. But
what was it previously called?
It was what was it? I'm blanking on the name of the original Boy Scout camp. It'll come to me, but.
I was in Troop 5 here in Austin in an Eagle Scout, so I was curious if I recognized the previous name, if we went on a camp out there or anything.
I bet you did. I don't know why I can't think of it right now, but yeah, and I think with the passing of Prop 14, $1 billion for new parks in Texas, passed by almost 75%, that's an incredible opportunity, to acquire more lands. But the big challenge we have, in these areas that are close to the I-35 corridor, is that the land's already been very fragmented. In Hays County, 91% of the parcels are 10 acres or less already. So there's been a lot of subdividing, these large, I think Texas Parks and Wildlife would like to see, 5,000 acre parks, larger parks that are part of this new initiative. So that's going to be a challenge. I think we might have to go a little further west to be able to do that. But what we've been focused on is really, we've put together almost 100. Just that first acquisition was 160 parcels that were subdivided back together. So we're really knitting back together property that had already been subdivided.
Wow. It's I remember when I was down there with you touring the property, and you went on this app that you had that showed all the different parcels and landowner information and all that, and you zoom out at those developments that are really coming in, encroaching on the well and the watershed or in the watershed, and it is just mind-boggling when you see from an overhead view all the different parcels and just how packed in there folks are and how much water that is. It's just shocking when you see it from that perspective.
Right. Yeah, that particular subdivision, the Wood Creek North, was platted back in 1972, kind of before there was all the awareness and knowledge about. Oh shoot!
No worries.
I'm sorry about that.
You're fine.
About the limitations of groundwater, and there's 3,600 platted lots, 1,300 homes there now. They're adding 50 or 60 a year. And so it's this, each house is 150,000 less that's going to be coming out, gallons that's going to be coming out of the aquifer. And one thing interesting.
I'm sorry, here, break that down. You said 150 gallons.
150,000 gallons.
Is that?
That's just an estimate if you use kind of Water Development Board's numbers of what an average home would use annually.
150,000 gallons
per household.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's about a half an acre foot, but. I think, when we get in these drought times, we have these curtailments that we're supposed to cut back. But that's what, in this last drought or last year and this year too, that aqua system, they didn't send out notices. They didn't notify people. So people just kept using. And they're using somewhere between 8,500 to 10,500 a month per house. But that number should have been closer to 4,000 to stay within the curtailment. So about 120 to 130 a day. And the key there is just really to not do outdoor watering. That's 60% of the water.
Is irrigation, landscaping, all of that.
Yeah. So it's, we have about 6,000 wells in western Hays County, and 98% of the wells are exempt wells, so they aren't regulated. Those are individual homeowners. But the big utilities, there's about 33, Aqua, Wimberley Water Supply, Dripping Springs, they are regulated by the local groundwater conservation district, so they can set limits on what they pump.
And my understanding there, though, with Aqua, I guess it's Aqua Texas, they've had a lot of bad press recently with over pumping, and they're the ones in the area there that directly affected Jacob's Well, it sounds like. Correct me where I'm wrong here, but they were supposed to pump a certain amount and were regulated for a certain amount and ended up pumping close to double that. And so that's what scares me is you can have these regulations, you can have these things in place and fight all you want up front on development standards, but they don't have any regulation. There's no way to enforce it on them. And then my understanding with the watershed districts is they have no teeth. They can put a fine on the company, but if the company doesn't pay the fine, there's no repercussion. So how do you stop a company like that from overpumping? And then you hear they're not sending out notices to people. It's like, holy cow, what is going on here?
I think that's you hit the head of the nail. It's just like we really need, the state needs to do something about these utilities. I would call rogue utilities that aren't following their drought contingency plans or aren't following the local groundwater conservation district rules. That's the bottom. That's the low bar.
To me, that's criminal. What companies do if they knowingly go and overpump on a water source they know is sensitive, like it is here? To me, that's criminal. I wish there was criminal charges pressed on that. I'm dead serious. I think that's absolutely insane that any sort of company at all can get away with this. It's just wild to me.
Well, when you're losing 30 to 40% in your line loss, you're just leaking it out. And think of it like this.
But they have statistics saying 30 to 40% of that water they pumped
is leaks. Nearly 40,000 or 40 million gallons was leak water.
That makes my blood boil.
Yeah, I know.
As a builder too, I know how I fix leaks, so that just makes me very frustrated.
It's very frustrating, and in thinking about the dynamics of the aquifer, think of this water pressurized, right? It's under pressure. 100, 130, 40 feet down, but they're they're intercepting that, so they're lowering. That water is very flat. It's the heads are very flat behind the faults there, and that's why Jacob's Well there's big faults, and then Jacob's Well is kind of the release valve. But we've in our research we've seen that even 6 inches of change in water level can stop the spring from flowing.
And it needs that pressure. I see.
So if you're pumping 300 gallons a minute and you're lowering that head, then you get the head gets equal with the spring mouth, so there's no more flow. And one fact I figured, I was researching this on a recent article San Antonio Express News did on the difference between the Trinity Aquifer and the Edwards. Because the Edwards is kind of like a bathtub, right? Water will, because it's older rock, so it's very porous, big conduits, and water will just pour into it and fill up. And there's zones like that above Jacob's Well and Pleasant Valley Springs that act like mini kind of Edwards. But a hydrologist told me one time, said, there's places in the Edwards water can move 5 miles underground in one day. But there's places in the Trinity, say up west of Dripping Springs, where water might move 5 inches in a year. So it's very different dynamics. The surface looks the same, but what's going on underground is very different.
So I had heard that I didn't ruin your train of thought, that with the Edwards Aquifer, I have heard similar, it fills up quickly. We could actually have a lot of heavy flooding and it could fill our aquifer. I've heard with the Trinity, which sounds like I'm understood somewhat correctly, that if we were to stop all usage out of the Trinity Aquifer today, it would take over 200 years to refill. I guess my understanding is water percolates into that. It takes much more time. The rock that the water is sitting in is much more dense. Yeah. And so it's really hard to penetrate that, and you need long-term saturation to trickle into that, unlike Edwards that we think is, a giant underground cave, more or less, that just fills up. And to me, am I accurate in thinking like that?
It is somewhat like that. I think there's parts of the Trinity that, like above Jacob's Well, that have all these karst features where recharge might be 25 to 30%. Normally across the region, we get 3 to 5% of recharge. So when it rains, only 3 to 5% is actually recharging. And that has to be, the right conditions. Like I say, 80% of that recharge is happening in the creeks themselves. So it's a complex system, but the thing that I learned, it was that in order for San Marcos Springs and Comal Springs to flow and Barton Springs, we have to keep about 95% of the water that's in the aquifer there to keep it pressurized enough to push that water out to form those rivers. And so that same principle works in the Trinity, but the Edwards has a cap on pumping. And that cap is there because the Edwards Aquifer Authority was formed because of endangered species, and San Marcos and Comal Springs required them to keep those base flows, so they had to set a cap on pumping. And city of San Antonio and Saws is the biggest user of that water. But in the Trinity, we don't, and really every other groundwater district, we don't have a cap on pumping. We don't have a way to say, all right, we've taken enough. And the districts are there to try to regulate that with these drought contingencies. And we even formed the Jacobs Well Management Zone, which set certain parameters which were tying the curtailments to the spring flow itself. So as the spring flow lowers, you have to curtail more and more. And that's what Aqua sort of ignored. And that's sort of why we're in the situation with the well not flowing, plus the drought. So it's a combination of like a bank account that you're withdrawing more than you're depositing, and you keep spending.
Is Canyon Lake attached to any of these aquifers? Being downstream of them?
Canyon Lake is in the Guadalupe Basin. It is, it's being fed by groundwater out of the Guadalupe River. So it's a similar groundwater fed system, but hydrologically not probably connected to Jacob's Well, and possibly some influence certainly on the Blanco River. And we think probably 15% of the recharge to Jacob's Well is coming from the Blanco zone. But, you see these areas too around the city of Blanco where we've lost 100 feet of groundwater level over the last, 30 years. And on average, I think we're losing 2 to 3 feet of water level across the whole region from just mining these aquifers, pumping out
more development.
Yeah, just pumping out more than we're recharging. So it's not a sustainable policy that we have, and the 30-foot drawdown as a policy, that's essentially doubled the amount of water these districts can hand out.
Could you break that down on what that means exactly?
So yeah, this is very, the state has a process called the Desired Future Conditions process. It was started in, I think, 2005, and what that was meant to be is a ground-up groundwater planning process. So what do we desire the future condition of our aquifer to be? And that can be a statement of drawdown. It could be a percentage of the saturated thickness. It could even be a spring flow. But the stakeholders come up with a way to quantify that. And pretty much when that first came out, the most of the people, 95% of the people said, we don't want to draw down the aquifers any. We want them to stay like they are forever. And the districts are like, wow, we got this huge population projections here. We can't do that. That's not reasonable. Well, how much population are we going to have? And the Water Development Board gave a number. Well, how much drawdown we have to use to meet that demand? Well, 30 feet. Well, that would give us enough water for this 2050 population.
And by drawdown 30 foot, we're just saying that the aquifer would be 30 feet lower than it is now?
On average.
On average,
and so each county kind of has its own number. I mean, Hayes County, I think, was 19. But the point is that allowed this managed available groundwater number, which is really now they're calling modeled available groundwater. That became kind of their permitting, not really a cap, more of a goal. And so, but it doubled what we had originally had as a sustainable, kind of trying to manage 90% of what the drought of record would have been. So, with a place like Jacob's Well, doubling the amount of pumping in an area that we've already, drawn down, considerably, is just completely unsustainable policy. Mm-hmm. So I think, that process goes every 5 years as a chance to reevaluate those. And so there is a chance for the public to give input. But, the boards just sort of somewhat ignore that input, and they made a decision based on what the demand was going to be in the future. So it's a lot of acronyms in that world. Mm-hmm. Everybody's like, gosh, how don't kill me with DFCs and MAGs and GMAs. There's just a lot of complicated things there. But I think the simple way to think of it is we're taking out more than is going in. And really, to manage it sustainably, we've got to try to balance that, and and that's what we've been working on, right? I mean, One Water, using rainwater collection, AC condensate, being more innovative with our water use and our water sources, is really going to be an important strategy for adding another 4 million people to this region in the next 27 years.
Yeah, the future of water in Texas is definitely a scary one right now. And I have people that occasionally, as soon as I bring it up, a lot of people ask, well, what can I do? What is there that can we do to help? And to me, there's no really easy answer. I think the lowest hanging fruit that I see is irrigation. I mean, that's 60% of our usage. I mean, that hit me this last summer. I had kind of an epiphany. I walked out my front yard, all my grass is dead, obviously yellow. I wasn't watering it. But I get out to my curb where there's that little strip by the street, and I just have weeds there. Yeah. They were thriving, all green, looked beautiful, weeds sitting there, and it just hit me all of a sudden, native versus non-native. Yeah. It was such a stark difference on what was thriving and what wasn't. And, as a home builder, we get into these heavy HOA neighborhoods and build, a 5, 6, 7, 8,000 square foot home, and they require you to have grass that's watered X number of times a week. They require you to have all these plants. And so it's crazy to me that you go drive through Barton Creek or really anywhere in West Austin through these heavy HOA neighborhoods, and they basically require homeowners to have bad water usage practices. And that's crazy to me. And why is, I guess like the whole zero-scape, idea, it just doesn't seem like it's really taking off. Like, how do we make that cool? I mean, maybe I might need a new name,
right.
The zero-scape.
Rebrand
it. But it's seriously, that to me is the lowest hanging fruit, and something that every single one of us has a hand in. I mean, unless you live in an apartment or something, but if you have a home, you are watering your yard is a direct issue here, and it sounds like 60%. And so for me, anyone listening, something to do. Like, yes, you can conserve water, try to shower less. But I mean, quit watering your yard is probably the biggest thing you can do, and change your plants. And so, if you have the ability to do that or live in a neighborhood, you can. I highly stress, trying to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's the low hanging fruit. That's half of the water use generally, or more. I think pivoting to what we're for in the 2019, we worked with the Wimberley ISD Independent School District to build what we call the first One Water school in Texas. And One Water being water at every point in the water cycle, whether it's rainwater, gray water, wastewater, storm water, all of it has value. And so it used to be thought of as kind of integrated water resource management. So we approached the school district and said, look, we can help you design the school to be, a model for water use. Teach the students, this conservation ethic. And so we put together a team, raised some money for the engineering, and this school collects rainwater harvesting, 80,000 square foot building, 900 students. Also AC condensate. We collect in the summers between 600 to 1,000 gallons of AC condensate off this building.
And that's good clean water too.
It's just like distilled water, and we treated all, but we flushed the toilets with that. It didn't go 100%, on rainwater. It's still using groundwater for drinking water and for the kitchen, but then we treat it on site. And then that is used for irrigation for the soccer play field and the landscape, and then green stormwater infrastructure to mitigate the runoff. And that school was modeled to use 90% less water than a normal school.
Is it built and finished?
Built, finished. I brought you the case study on it.
Very cool.
And but then the other good news on it is that it's going to save the school district $1 million in water and sewer rates over the next 20 to 25 years.
Wow.
So we've won all kinds of awards. The Water Development Board has recognized it. Lots of schools are coming saying, hey, how do we do this? Because it's really there's a neat video on our website that has the students from the school explaining the different parts of the infrastructure. I think we should have second graders explain everything to us, because it's just so great how they understand these concepts. And we got pervious pavers and a lot of and we got in kind of late on the design process. So I think my message to the listeners would be, try to get in earlier and work with the school district to show these, not only the benefits financially, because it cost about the same as the traditional infrastructure to put in. Going with Aqua, it would have been the same amount of money cost up front, but the savings is huge. And then the savings to the aquifer, we're not drawing down that aquifer, and this school sits in between Blue Hole and Jacob's Well, so it's called Blue Hole Elementary. And so it's been that I think is the model that we'd like to take to the residential scale, to the subdivision scale, and that purple pipe or that reuse water, that's what's watering the outside space, not fresh drinking water or aquifer water. And that transformation, I think, in terms of a paradigm for water management is really, and we're going to have to do that if we're going to add another projected 4 million to this region, and then by 2050.
Absolutely.
I don't know. We're not going to invent more water, and the strategy now is to go take it, from the Carrizo Wilcox and pump it back to the west from these eastern counties, but that water is not infinite either. There's vast amounts out there, but.
Where is that region?
So if you go east of I-35, there's an aquifer there as you go into the coastal plains called the Carrizo Wilcox. Okay. And that is a sand aquifer, so it's got pretty large amounts of water in it. But it also affects the Colorado River. Recently, about 3 years ago, San Antonio built the Vista Ridge pipeline. So they went to Lee County drilled wells, and they built a 178-mile pipeline back to San Antonio. It was a $3 billion project.
Wow.
But in the first year of pumping, well owners around that area, their wells dried up. They're having to lower their wells. And I don't know how sustainable that is long term but there are lots of projects to bring water from that region back to the hill country. But with that, comes extreme expense, much denser, more development over, sensitive areas, much higher water rates. There's a lot to be considered there. And then what about those communities we're taking that water from?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about those ranchers that are, running 1,000, 2,000 head of cattle and have their wells. I mean, who's paying to fix their wells when those go dry? There's no easy answer. When you mentioned that other aquifer, and you said it was a sand aquifer, I haven't heard that term before. Is that so? Instead of here, we have limestone that's porous. Is it just tons of sand underground that water is going through?
It's more sediment, and not as much rock and karst like we have in the hill country. So, I-35 is generally on the Balcones fault zone. So that's kind of where the hill country starts and where this uplift, where we have these karst systems is, and then the coastal plains, has a different geology and hydrogeology there. So those water doesn't move as fast through those. It doesn't recharge as rapidly. And in the hill country, we have essentially three aquifers. We got the upper Trinity, the middle, and then the lower Trinity. And that lower Trinity is not, water is probably 30,000 years old. It's been there since the Ice Age. The middle Trinity does recharge more rapidly, but the upper Trinity, a lot of it's been depleted. So, and that's the other thing about having this DFC that's for three aquifers that have different characteristics. That's really not manageable or sustainable.
What's the DFC? We go with acronyms.
The desired future condition.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's that we could probably do 3 podcasts just on that. Why that's and I think in principle it's a inspired idea. Let's ask the communities what they want their aquifer to look like in the future. But if we don't listen to what the communities say and we adopt policies that are counter to that, I think we continue to mine these aquifers. And I just don't think that should be the policy. I think we should be required to have sustainable. Arizona just passed a law that said you have to have a 100-year water plan for your subdivision if it comes in. I don't know if we could do that. I don't know how we do that without a lot more thoughtful planning.
It's exciting to see the One Water School work, and I'm curious, with Aqua Texas, they, had a certain number they said they were going to do, and as far as pumping, and didn't meet it. So playing devil's advocate with you, you were saying 90% less water. Did that hold true? I mean, is it working as planned?
In our study, this first year, because it was we were in years of drought, we had between 50 to 75% savings.
Okay,
but we had about a 50% savings on cost compared to Jacobsville Elementary, which is using aqua water. So it is saving on the costs and it is saving on the water. But we've been in these, we've been 16 inches less rainfall. So there's makeup water that comes in if we don't get the rainfall. But, you think about that AC condensate. Imagine what the Austonian or these buildings downtown, how much AC condensate they generate.
Absolutely.
It's almost like the building becomes a spring, it's generating this new water. So that's I think, how we have to start thinking. Where can we, every drop matters really in this equation. How do we do that in a cost-effective way for the future? And, the city of San Antonio, they'll give people low-flow toilets, low-flow fixtures, because it's less expensive for them to give away those things than go out and find new water. But it's falling on our roofs. Let's catch it.
Absolutely. Earlier, when you were talking about the different technologies in the school, it reminded me of a saying that I've heard from an architect named Steve Basic, and he has this saying about building science principles that they have to be integrated, not applied. And as far as cost savings, and if you are able to integrate these systems, the cost really isn't that much more. But when you go to apply them, it is. And I feel like that's very true with water usage and different things that we have. Is trying to apply them to buildings that have already been built. Still a great idea, but it can be expensive. But if you're able to integrate them into the design from the start, it makes such a huge difference. And like the school you mentioned, you got in a little late, but being a part of the process as it's being developed makes such a huge difference. And so it's just exciting to hear that it worked on that school.
Yeah, there's a engineer, David Van Huysen, who's been kind of preaching this for 30 plus years, and he's got a wonderful blog and he's an incredible designer. We've done mock-ups for these subdivisions, and I think that's really our next big project is to the county has passed these rules or these guidelines called conservation development guidelines, where it would keep 50% of a site protected, but it would have a scorecard. If you use rainwater, if you reuse water on site, it gives you points, and if you get up to a certain level, the county would give you a PID or essentially allow you to bond that infrastructure, so the developer wouldn't have to put that money out of pocket, and even pay some for the open space. So no one's built one of these yet. We need about 75 to 85 homes for that to work, for the bonding. But I think that kind of innovation is where we're going to have to go, where that becomes the rule, not the exception, especially in these water scarce areas like the hill country.
Absolutely. And building new, there's no reason to not integrate these. I mean, when we have the opportunity to do it right, we absolutely should.
Well, as a developer, if somebody said, hey, if you will build it this way, you wouldn't have to put money out of pocket for the infrastructure. That would be assessed in a home fee for the new owners. Would that be of interest to you?
I'm interested.
Okay.
Yeah, I know some builders that would be all about it.
Right. So I think that's the other side of this, right? We need the right regulations, but we also need the right incentives. We need the carrots too, to say, look, this is for the public's good. This is for the good of these resources, to do it in this different way. But a lot of the engineering firms are just like, this is how we've always done it. We got to break that pattern and incentivize this new way. And I think that's the big challenge is how to shift that paradigm.
I think it starts with education. I think it's awesome that those second graders at that school, I think he says the Blue Hole Elementary School, the fact that they can explain the difference that they're building and draw a blank there, sorry. The building practices that went into that school, are those able to be implemented on current schools and current systems that can adopt it, or does it have to be new construction to implement those building practices?
No, I think you can retrofit in certain instances. That's more expensive sometimes to retrofit, so planning it from the get-go. But there are new schools being built all the time. We even had, the folks from Robb Elementary came over from Uvalde, and because they're going to build a new school there. So I think we've had 8 or 10 schools come and visit and walk through. But what we need, I think, is kind of like a one water SWAT team. That's like, the engineer, the builder, the designer that can, kind of come in and help to do that. And, we were able to get some philanthropic funds to pay for our engineers and our team. We worked real closely with Meadows Center, Nick Dornack, who's now at Doucette and Associates. So he's moved over from Meadows Center for Water and Environment to working in the private sector to advance One Water for Doucette Engineering. So I think we're still in the nascent kind of early stages of that, but Mitchell Foundation, Hill Country Alliance, there's a lot of groups that are really pushing this. And Hill Country Alliance had this great workshop about a month ago down in Boerne, where they brought in, I think it was 60 or so elected officials and did a day-long kind of seminar with different engineers and practitioners talking about how to implement One Water and a resolution that their councils could adopt to say, we want to work on this in the future as a policy.
Very interesting. That's wonderful. As you were talking about Hill Country Alliance or mentioned them, could you explain what a conservation easement is? I feel like I have a pretty good understanding, but I don't. That term gets thrown around a lot. There's a lot you hear about landowners doing that on their property. But for folks listening, would you mind breaking that down?
Yeah, it's a great tool. It's generally used for private landowner. And we have about 35 or so land trust operating in Texas. So the Land Trust is a nonprofit organization like the Nature Conservancy or Hill Country Conservancy, which actually holds the conservation easement in trust. There's a statewide group called the Texas Land Trust Council, and there's some fantastic landowner guides and information about conservation easements there. But essentially, it's an agreement between the landowner and the land trust to protect the conservation values of a given property. So those might be, a forest. It might be, a water feature. It might be, the groundwater. And we think of it like the development rights are like a bag of sticks, right? I can subdivide. I can drill a water well. I can build certain things on the property. As you the way it works is that you go, well, to protect this property and the conservation values, we're going to have to make sure it's not subdivided, or we are going to leave, say, 4 lots for my kids to build houses, but 95% of the property is going to stay in conservation, purpose, and it could be agricultural purpose too. There's a Texas Ag Land Trust that protects farms, working farms. So whatever those values are, we say we want to protect those. And then you say, all right, I'm going to restrict these future uses. And then there's an appraisal done of those development rights intact, if as it is now. And then there's an appraisal done of when we remove those rights, what that difference is. And the difference becomes it can be used as a federal tax deduction. So, and that can be spread out over many years. Generally, that comes down to around 40 to 50% of the value of the property. So, in essence, you're restricting the value of it, but you're also getting this tax benefit. And in some cases, there's purchasing of those development rights in certain situations where those monies are available. Programs like the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, there's federal monies that will actually buy those rights.
And then they buy those rights not to do anything with it, but just to make sure that they're protected in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So if I was a landowner, just to break it down, if I had 1,000 acres west of town, and I wanted to put it into a conservation easement, then I could go to an organization like the Hill Country Alliance and say, hey, I have 1,000 acres that I'd like to protect. I want to keep 50 of those acres for my family and I for potential developments. The rest of it, is going to be undeveloped, but I'd like to be able to, ride horses, or, you put some legalities on there, what it protects. And then it sounds like the value of what you then owe from a tax point of view would go down. So you'd be saving money on property tax,
right,
mixed with you could actually have some tax balance that we could spread out over the years on that missing revenue portion on those rights. So it seems like for a landowner, if you don't want to develop and keep it in the family, why would you not do a conservation easement?
I think it's a great tool because it's very flexible like that. You can, all right, I'm going to leave this part out of the easement, or we're going to create these building envelopes for future development or family housing. Whatever you retain can't impact the conservation values of the other. So, drilling a well that's going to dry up the stream on this property that probably wouldn't qualify. So, it's got to be truly protecting those conservation values. But you mentioned Hill Country Alliance. It's really Hill Country Conservancy.
Oh, that's right, Hill Country Conservancy. That's right.
But Hill Country Alliance certainly promotes this method. But it's but I think the other advantage for the landowner is, one, it's flexible tool to be custom for their family's needs, but the public benefits because we get water quality protection. We get habitat protected. We're sequestering carbon. It's doing what I'd call these ecosystem services in perpetuity. And so that's a long time. Perpetuity is forever. So the land trust responsibility is to monitor that. Maybe once a year they come out and make sure that all those agreements are upheld, and then that stays with the land. If the landowner sells it to the next owner, that easement goes with it. So that has to stay in place. And so it's I think there's nearly a million, maybe it's 1 million acres that are in conservation easement now.
Wow.
I really encourage folks to go to Texas Land Trust Council's website, because they've got great data on all not only the private benefits but the public benefits. And you mentioned it too, that 97% of the land in Texas is privately owned, and that's going to be we have a great heritage of stewardship and conservation in the state, and I think that those private landowners are going to be how we're going to really protect these watersheds and these conservation values. You had Ben on with the Deep in the Heart film. When you see that and you see how rich and amazing this state is, it should inspire folks to want to really be part of that solution.
How does the conservation easement hold up to the state coming in with eminent domain wanting to build a new road?
They can be condemned. In some ways they become targets too, because it's like, wow, there's nothing there. We're just going to go through there. That is not good. But it still can be. It certainly becomes discouraging to building a road through a preserve. But it happens, or a pipeline or something like that. So it doesn't fully protect you from eminent domain. But we actually have a film that we did on the Permian Highway pipeline fight. So many landowners that got run over by Kinder Morgan and that pipeline, and we hope to be releasing that soon. We've been doing some impact screenings with it, but this is a property rights state. It's about people are like, this is my land, I can do what I want with it. But I think with the property right also comes with some responsibility too.
Absolutely.
So we got to balance that. And what we, I think everybody, there's nobody that's going to say, oh, I don't want clean water, I don't want clean, fresh flowing streams and clean air. But what we have to do to get that sometimes is maybe a little more than what we maybe think it is.
I just hate the stigma that's around a lot of different conservation topics where you start talking about water usage, and I think a lot of people quickly start to tune you out or think it's some hippy dippy stuff, and they don't want to hear it, but it affects all of us so deeply. And I think there's just a lot of being in construction as a home builder, my entire career in Austin, conservation is not a topic that gets brought up, and you look at, contractors love complaining about silt fencing around your job site, but that's such a crucial part of actually managing your job site correctly and the maintenance that goes with them. And it's just completely lost on builders, or at least most builders. And it's, I hate to see it, and so for me, I like to be in that space and be someone that's speaking up for it, because conservation is cool. I really think it is. And I wish it didn't have the stigmas that come with it. But I think the only way that you can really fight those is through education and letting people understand what's really going on.
Well, and I think meeting people where they are too. I think having an enemy narrative or a catastrophic, apocalypse narrative, that's not going to inspire people. And having less than what you have now, that's not inspiring either. We want abundant water for all. We want to be able to have access to these open spaces. We want to be able to have healthy communities. So how do we work towards that? And I think the key to the success that I've had, that our organization has had, is that we get together people from different sectors. We get the developer and the regulator and the city and the groundwater district all together to have these conversations about where our interests meet, how we can, our shared interest is really together, and how do we negotiate something that maybe we don't get everything we want, but at least we understand that we're, our fates are tied together.
I mean, it's compromise, and that's what we have to have, absolutely.
And I really feel like that we've got to do more to listen to one another and meet each other where we are at, because talking above someone or talking like more than they do, that's not going to win you any friends, and certainly not a solution that's going to benefit these larger ecosystems.
Absolutely. Switching topics slightly, Jacob's Well, you've been out there since the 80s. There's got to be some fun, crazy stories. Who have you shown up walking down the hill, seeing in the well? I mean, I know there's got to be some old Austin stories. Some you probably can't share, but are there any that you'd like to share?
Just seeing the joy that it brings to people. I mean, back when we finally got it all together, I was like, okay, let's give it over to the government. What could go wrong? And that's when we realized that having the conservation easement was going to make sure that it was stayed in conservation management. But it has been a really good thing. The county has done an amazing job, I think, at managing that access. But before it was county, I remember one day I see these two guys kind of walking down the path, towards our house, and they had a guy who was a Tibetan monk. He had his monk outfit on, and it was Jimmy Dale Gilmore and Joe Ely, and they had this young Tibetan monk with them, and we went down to the well together and sat with him, and he told us all, gave us all this insight, and we were asking him questions, and then I said, well, could you come and bless the well? And walked down. He stood on the weir there for the longest time, and we were all just anticipating what he was going to say. And he was probably 20, in his 20s, young. I'm blank. I can't remember his name, but I do remember Joe Ely and Jimmy Dale Gilmore. It's Texas legends. And then he just looked up and he said, "You've asked me to come and bless the well, but it is the well that has blessed me."
Oh, wow.
That's what a monk would say. But that was pretty cool. And,
yeah.
But we've had so many things. I mean, christenings. My children were christened there. Lots of christenings. We've had weddings. We've had people spread the ashes of their loved ones. And just the kids jumping off that rock. It's such a tradition. And I remember when the county was taking it over. Oh, we can't let kids jump off that rock. And we're like, that's kind of the only thing there is to do there at the well.
That's the point of this place.
And they went, and I remember even the constable and others got up and said, you can't take that away. You got to let people do that. And just, the young kid that jumps off that rock into that well, there's just so many memories there. It's just, I think of my kids, swimming there every day when they were young, and there's just a lot of stories. Probably I think people come there because it's a healing place too. I think those waters are powerful, and even without the flow, you can still feel there's something special there. But when that water is flowing, it's crystal clear, it's bubbling up, and you jump in those ice cold waters and it's 102 out. There's just nothing like that.
Can't beat it.
You can't beat it. It's the best thing in the world. It's kind of the natural air conditioning of the summers here. And but yeah, recently we were standing down there, and there was a young mother who was walking up. This creek bed was dry, and there's still a little bit of water in the well, and she had this little baby with her, just newborn. I said, where are you from? She said, I came from Houston, and I saw the well on the internet, and I told my husband that we need to come here because I was suffering from postpartum depression, and I felt like coming here would help me heal that. I was like, wow.
All the way from Houston.
All the way from Houston, drove up there, and and I remember our friend Johanna Johanna Smith, who was one of our founders, whose land, her father used to own all that land out there. She was on our founding board. She brought an Aboriginal from Australia elder there, and he walked up and dropped to his knees and was like, he just started kind of praying, and it's that kind of place. It's just like it's a sacred place, and I think there's a lot of lore around the scuba divers and the lost lives and things there, but you think about that spring flowing maybe for millions of years, and just the beauty and the intelligence of a system like that, and that we have the privilege to experience that, seeing it dried up for a few thousand tract homes. It just doesn't seem like a fair trade. It's not what we should
Definitely
be doing. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it here, and I think the key is awareness. Mm-hmm. I think if the folks up there in Wood Creek North know that the water that they use in their house is the same water that their kids jump in when they jump in Blue Hole or the well, connecting those dots, creating more awareness is really the key. And
absolutely.
Have y'all found many arrowheads, Indian artifact stuff down there?
Oh yeah.
I can't imagine what it was like in the 1700s, 1600s. I bet it was amazing.
Or 15,000 years. I mean, at San Marcos Springs, they've found occupation there for over 15,000 years. Wow. That same thing was happening there at the well. I mean, there's points all over the place there. There's a big burnt rock midden on the other side where they used to cook food there. It's been looted pretty badly over the years and has not been fully protected like it should be. It's still on private land, but those must have been a magnet, for indigenous people, and an interesting kind of to more modern times when that we think that well was named after Jacob D. Cordova, and he owned over 1 million acres of scrip Spanish land grants in Texas. He came from Jamaica. Was a Jewish kind of entrepreneur. Really interesting story. He wrote a book called Texas, Her Natural Resources and Public Men in 1848, and it's it's a thick book. And he was kind of the promoter. He was like, and he wrote a couple of paragraphs in that book about Jacob's Well, and he said. In the Rio Blanco Valley, there's this one spring. Then he called it Jacob's Well, so I don't know if it was already named that or he just named it after himself. But he said it's well worthy of a visit to all those who delight in the sublime and beautiful. You can see a pin down to 40 feet, and there are many fine home building sites in the area. So he was kind of the original, developer.
Coming out there to promote it. That's too funny.
But the watershed recently, or not recently, about 2014, we acquired this land that called around Rebecca Springs down in Comal County, and it's a spring that's kind of emanating out of this cliffside, forms Rebecca Creek that flows into the Guadalupe above Canyon Lake, and the utility company had drilled this well down into the spring in 2011, and because they had run out of water rights from Canyon to feed this mud that was there, about 400 homes, and of course when they turned those pumps on, the creek dried up, the spring stopped, and the creek dried up, and the landowners got mad. They got on the board, and they ended up retiring that well, and they said, if we donate this to you, you guys cap this well. I was like, yeah, of course. And I'm standing there in this old historic house across the way that has a cabin from 1850s, and I said, well, what's the history of this? And the owner said, well, this was owned by Jacob D. Cordova. His wife was Rebecca. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of following this guy around the hill country. So Rebecca Springs and Rebecca Creek was Jacob's wife.
Oh, wow.
So, that, he was going to where the water sources were. So it's kind of neat to look back on that, recent history. But, yeah, the ancient history there is just, these were sacred places for, these indigenous people.
Great. Absolutely. I've heard stories, I don't know how accurate they are, that back in the 50s, I don't know, early 1900s, Jacob's Well used to look like like a pot of water boiling, like the water coming up with that much pressure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, at normal flow, at least of today's standards, how many gallons an hour or minute, or do we have any flow rate statistics of how much water in good flow that actually is?
Yeah, the normal flow, average flow, generally is between 4 and 8 cubic feet per second. So you think about that, 1 cubic foot per second it ends up being about an acre foot a day, or no, actually 2 acre feet. So that's 660,000 gallons or so. So, 2 acre feet is 1.2 million. So, so normal flow is probably about around 3 to 4 million gallons a day.
Wow.
And, there's been there's times where I've seen it at 80 CFS, after we had big rain, and you will see that boiling effect. And that's where it's just kind of boiling out of the, bubbling up a couple of feet. And Bill Johnson, who, recently passed, who was one longtime landowner there at Blue Hole, we've got video and stories that he told about when he was a kid, that it was like that all the time. He'd jump in there and push you back up. You couldn't really swim back down.
The kid in me wants to, I'm sitting here thinking about trying to swim down that, if I could.
and he even, in this little video we have, if you go on YouTube and just do Jacobsville Natural Area, there's a little 10-minute video there. And they made a diving helmet out of like an old kind of washing machine or something. It was like this archaic looking thing, and they had a compressor pump, and I guess at one point they had a bicycle pump, and they'd go down in this little rig and try to see how far it went down. There's a lot of neat stories like that, but he says it was obviously flowing a lot more when we didn't have aqua and these big wells pumping out of that aquifer up there. So I think that's a vision for restoration for it. Why not? Let's have that be the goal. Mm-hmm. Let's return it to that level. I think through moving that pumping out of the zone, working to do certain land restoration, bioswales, where we're slowing that water down, putting gabions in these ravines where we're building more head back behind that. It's only about 8,000 acres. That's the key recharge area there. I think that's doable. We can work with the private landowners to really, conserve and restore those areas. But the groundwater pumping, it's just math. You can't take out more than is going in, and we get in these critical periods, you've got to cut back.
Absolutely. Would you mind breaking down? Sorry, I'm having you, give us all sorts of term breakdown today, but groundwater, surface water. I know people get confused by that. Would you mind giving us a little breakdown there?
Oh boy, yeah. Well, surface water. So all this water in the rivers, lakes, that's owned and managed by the state of Texas. There is a water rights program and frankly, those water rights have been over allocated by about 3 to 4 times what we have on paper as what water we have in those rivers. But that's managed by the state. So you can't go and get a new permit to pump water out of the Blanco River, most likely, unless you buy another right. But groundwater is owned by the landowner in place. So it's a private property right. So, if you and I would argue that to really own that water, you need to put a well in and capture that water, and then owning it means you can use it because. But the groundwater conservation districts regulate that, how much that can be pumped, except for exempt wells, right? So in a lot of counties, they have 10 acres as a minimum for an exempt well. In Hays County, if you're going to do a subdivision, you have to have 6 acres to drill a water well for your subdivision. And they require water availability tests, in the beginning before that's platted. But that's the difference. It's like Aqua's pumping it out up here, pumping groundwater out, but that's water that's making its way to become surface water at Cypress Creek. It's the same water. So at what point, does the groundwater become the state's water, but is intercepting it back here and taking away those downstream rights? And I would argue the value of those properties, property that's got waterfront, that's flowing, that's clean, that's worth a lot more than one that's just on a dry creek bed. So I think that needs to be adjudicated in some way. There needs to be some way to balance this private property, right of taking water from groundwater and the state's, right for that surface water. That's a huge, huge issue. And I don't see the state probably changing those laws anytime soon. It's been brought to the courts through the Day case and the Edwards, and there is a lot of debate about that. But ultimately, it's the same water. Mm-hmm. So we should really think of ways how do we manage that in a much more equitable way, so we don't dry up our Texas rivers, especially
Absolutely.
These hill country rivers are
so
primarily, the pristine, what would be considered the pristine streams. There's about 21 or 22 that have that low phosphorus background. And, in that, we had a bill a few sessions ago that was focused on, this is a little different topic, but focused on wastewater discharge into those pristine streams, because they have, below 0.01 phosphorus background. And when you discharge wastewater into them, they just turn into algae blooms, right? So this bill was essentially trying to, ban discharge in those watersheds. It got through the House, didn't pass the Senate, but I just saw Friday that because then we kind of turned our focus on rule making. Like, let's try to make the rules stricter, because I think TCEQ's rule was 0.5, phosphorus, and the background is 0.01. So I think that this case in on the San Gabriel River, there was a ruling that they recommended that it be 0.15 or instead of 0.5. So that's a big jump in terms of quality. But I just these streams don't have plants in them to take up phosphorus and take up nitrogen like the Trinity River or the Colorado. These are rock bottom, streams that just can't absorb.
It'll just create algae instead of plant growth absorbing.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And so that's part of it, and that water recharges back into the drinking water supplies. So, we just think probably discharge in the hill country streams is probably not an ideal use of that water.
Yeah, I would definitely not be a fan of that. Well, what have we missed? What's anything going on? What's for Watershed Association? Any big events coming up you want to get out there? Or Jacob's Well? Anything? What's the next 6 months look like for you?
Yeah, we just this past weekend we had a really neat event at Beerberg Brewery. It was called Beers Made by Walking, and it was so Beerberg came together and they brought, I think, 12 or 15 other brewers, and they went and toured the Jacobsville Natural Area, Shield Ranch, a nature conservancy preserve on Barton Creek, and then I think a Colorado River Land Trust, a private landowner. They collected native plants and they use those plants to make beers with. And so we tasted them this weekend. It was really neat.
Were they good?
Oh, it was awesome, man. They had like yopon, and they had juniper berries and mugwort and all these different plants that were mixed in the beer. It was really, really interesting. But the Land Trust got to talk about the work that we do, and Trevor from Beerberg is just, he's just an amazing herbalist. He took us on that walk, and even the parking lot, we're like, wow, look at all these plants that have these different. He educated us so much about what's there. So that was cool. I think the next 6 months, the big thing is really going to be, can we get Aqua Texas to really come together with us and try to solve some of those overpumping issues, the leaks, moving these wells, really work on a more comprehensive plan. We're thinking of creating a kind of watershed task force where we would really try to solve some of these long-term issues around the lack of water and the demand. How are we going to bridge that delta? I think closing on this Karst Canyon Preserve, transferring that to the county is a big deal. We've got this Art for Water program. I think
I saw that. I saw it in your cup. What is the Art for Water program?
So this is one of the images. We have about 65 of these amazing art kites. They're big, kites that have been. We put out a call to artists that they sent in their art based on water and springs, and it's called the Sacred Springs Kite Exhibition. We hung these at the Austin downtown library there for about 7 months. They were in the San Marcos Library. We've got a small exhibit now at Bergstrom Airport.
Oh, cool.
And on our website, you could buy. There's I think 8 of these, the different Great Springs that were done by John Mata, kind of in that national park style. But there's all different kinds of art that's represented there. And so we intend that to tour around to bring awareness to these Great Springs and how important they are to Texas and to our heritage and to our future. And, we think art's a great lens, to bring attention, the data and all the acronyms. People are like, oh, no more.
Show me pretty pictures.
Yeah, show me something pretty and make me feel something. And so that's what this is about. And, I think the center, the Flow Center, we bought the 6.5 acres there at the front of Blue Hole Park, and we're in the process of redesigning that to become, performing arts and art galleries, cafe. We've got a Blanco River Academy school there that we're helping them raise money. It's a environmental-based school. And so that's going to be essentially a campus working with Texas State Meadows Center on our watershed protection plan, as well as the humanities department there. They've started an engaged ecology program, a PhD program with an engaged ecology. And so that's more the humanities looking at, what is our, we're not separate from nature. We are nature. It's more of a deeper dive into kind of how we feel about the natural world and our place in it. So we got a lot of fingers in a lot of different places, but I think our number one thing is it's got to rain again, right? It's gonna rain.
I'm gonna do my rain dance every morning. I don't know what's going on.
Got to do our rain dance because, man, it's grim out there. We need that rain, but in the meantime, I think we need people to keep conserving, even though it rains a little bit. I call that the hydroillogical cycle, right? It's like, oh, everything's fine. We can just go back. But it's, we're still in drought here, even though we're still about 20 inches behind in rainfall. And so, until you see that river really flowing at its full capacity, and you see that we're not in these drought stages, I think people need to continue to conserve. And then this innovation. I think we're going to really be looking at this kind of one water at the residential scale. How do we really scale up that approach? And I think we need some demonstration projects where we can show that the proof of concept that it works. And I think just this networking of organizations. We I say if the problem is a 50-gallon drum, our organization's a teacup dipping out of there, but if we got 1,000 teacups dipping in there, we can make an impact. So, and this collaboration is really important. And the things you've done for West Cave, I just can't say enough about how important it is to get young people out in nature.
Absolutely.
Maybe that is the greatest act of stewardship we could do is to take a young person fishing or take them on a hike or take them swimming. We spend so much time, well, then we all do in front of our screens, but let's get them outside, get them to see the beauty and feel that joy of jumping in those spring waters. And I think that's. I so admire what West Cave has done, and we hope to emulate some of those programmatic aspects at the Flow Center.
That's great. Love to hear it. Well, what can we do for people to get a hold of you? I mean, how would you like? Do you want people reaching out? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, probably the best thing to do is just go to watershadassociation.org. Sign up for our newsletter there. And, we've got a ton of information. We've got a searchable library with all these studies and research. We have also Facebook and Instagram sites that we post things pretty much daily, things on there that are happening. Got a great calendar of events around the region. I think these other organizations, Hill Country Alliance, Hill Country Conservancy, Nature Conservancy, San Marcos River Foundation. There's so many groups that are doing, Trinity Edward Springs Protection Association. There's, over 150 organizations across the whole Hill Country that are part of this Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. Find the groups that are in your area or that are in your area of interest and join them. Get involved, make a contribution. Be a member, I think we can. We have to. We've got to make a difference because there's no other choice, right? This Texas Water Trade is one of the groups we work with. They're, working on this kind of, they call it net zero water, working, all over the state to ensure that there's going to be clean water, in the future as we grow, double our population by 2050. We're going to have to be much more innovative than we have been in the past, and there are people doing the work. So, so many groups. I can't even name them all, but just support these local groups. Get involved in your community, and really know where your water is coming from. And know if that source is protected. And if you've got a rain tank, if you got one, thank you. And if you haven't, consider that, because that one act, I think, can really make a big difference.
That's great. Well, thank you for all you've done for conservation. And Jacob's Well, I don't think we would all today, in large part to you, have Jacob's Well as the park and the access that we do today. And so I've jumped off that rock many a time. So I thank you very much for that. Everything Watershed Association's doing for conservation. So if there's anything we can do to help with that, we would absolutely love to, and we'd love to have you back on some point down the line, check back in on things, see how it's doing, or maybe have you come on and with a friend. You'd mentioned a buddy of yours with the One Water School. That maybe we have you guys back on and dive into that. It'd be a good time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys for having me and let me just ramble on and talk about all this stuff, because it's been a big part of my life this past 30 plus years. But it's great to find a cause that's bigger than yourself, that will hopefully live on beyond you. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, because I feel like at this point in my life, what I want to do is really I want to encourage this next generation, like you guys. I mean, we got to pass this torch to keep this ethic, grow this ethic, and conservation. You know, we maybe don't think about it a lot, but it's so important, I think, for the quality of life and for the things we love here. And you guys are doing a great service, and I appreciate, especially coming as a builder to this. That I think that's the conversation we need to have, right? It's how do we build more sustainably and have policies that are going to support that and you know, create some more access for people to access these places and that have been traditionally maybe out of reach. But thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Of course.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.
And we're out.